Just on the topic of fairness, you have a new paper coming out in AMJ, I believe, which is titled Agency Workers for Performance.
Yeah.
And maybe expand on that a little, because I think the psychology of that is fascinating.
Mhm.
Pandemic, back to work aside, this whole, what is the nature of the workforce? And, we have companies, well-known, very profitable companies with massive contract workforces.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I
Right.
wonder about the logic of that. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. So Google right now, has half of its workforce are contractors, right? Which is pretty typical in the tech world. And I did a little estimate or looked at other people's estimates. About 30% of the labor budget in a typical US corporation is for non-employees. Interestingly, they're not necessarily contractors. They're often leased employees, which means they're employees of a staffing firm or some other firm where you are effectively becoming their co-employer, which why that is a quirky question. So in this particular paper, which is more my co-author's Liat's work probably than mine, but what we found there was this issue of kind of attachment and engagement and how you think about yourself, your identification with the organization. Depends in part on how you are treated, of course. And the more temp workers we bring in to do work like you're doing, the more you sort of think of yourself as being like a temp worker. And so your identification with the organization falls and your performance falls as well, right? And you can see how a lot of companies want to have this both ways, right? You want people to both be on a very short leash and no commitments to them, but you want them to be committed to you and to act like you are committed. And this is unfortunately just not going to work. This is something to think about, of course, in the context of a remote workforce. Is the more you push people away, the less you see them, the harder it is for them to be committed. Because one of the things we know is people rarely are committed to a label or to a stock ticker symbol. They're committed to the people that they work with. And if you don't see those people, that commitment begins to fall apart, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think the comparative framing is really, really interesting, because again, back to, what do you pick up when you're physically together? A lot of those social comparisons,
Oh, yes,
so-and-so
right.
gets this
That's
perk
right.
and I don't, or somebody else gets
Yeah.
invited to that meeting and I don't, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the commentators, Kathleen, I think, says she's talking about taking a job in Chicago where they're going to want her to move there, but she's reporting to somebody in the UK.
Yeah, right.
Where does this kind of decision making come from?
Yeah, right. Well, I think earlier you put your finger on it, and I wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review last year on this question. Is that
one of the top must reads for 2021?
Oh, is that
Rita
right? I didn't know that. Oh, well.
Yeah, it's just come out. It's just come out.
Oh, okay. They don't tell me anything.
Well,
Thank you for passing that on.
There you
and
go.
that is, this sort of optimization thinking, which is kind of just ignoring the human dimension. So let me give you an example about this. If you do a remote workforce that's kind of hybrid. So hybrid means you're sometimes in the office, you're sometimes at home. The big problem for the employer on this, which is hard to see what they get out of this, though, the big problem is scheduling. How do we schedule meetings? How do we cover things in the office if we can all work from home 3 days a week or 2 days a week, right? What if we pick the wrong days, right? And one of the ways you could try to solve this is with sophisticated scheduling software. The other way you could do it with is an older technique, it's called flex time, which is basically the team gets together and works it out, right? Why should we spend a ton of money on software to try to dictate this from the top down when everything we know is the team working it out themselves is way more flexible? They're able to deal with these kind of equity issues, what's fair, and the give and take of this. They like it better. They're engaged in it more. I mean, you do have to worry about the group dynamics. So why are we going to software? Well, it sounds simpler to the people at the top. It sounds cheaper. And they're thinking, well, the supervisor now doesn't have to do this. Well, the supervisor shouldn't be doing it by themselves anyway, right? They're just kind of the overseer over this, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this kind of leap toward what is going to be cheap And in particular, what might be a kind of optimizing solution, because that's like the smart thing to do, but it's not really the smart thing to do if you understand how people actually function.